Hi, everyone. You know, when it comes to news, there was a time when a headline meant something, when reporters verified before they posted and truth stood taller than the story itself. But that time really feels distant now, doesn't it? I spent over 25 years in local TV news. I had almost every job that you could have inside a newsroom. And over a quarter of a century in that field, I saw a lot of changes. In a world flooded with headlines and hashtags, truth isn't lost, it's just harder to find. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Current Temp, brought to you by our good friends over at Lexus of Memphis. I'm Joey Solopek, and today we're going to check the temp on what you watch, read, and believe. I'm calling this one Listening Past the Echo, and I really think this is something important. I hope you take the time to listen, think about it, and maybe discuss with your family and your friends. Why is all this so important? Because truth used to be clear, and now it's curated. I was thinking back on my past, and it's hard to believe that when I started in TV news, there was no internet or cell phone. I know I'm that old. TVs were really big. You remember those old square sets. They called them 4 by 3 because that was the shape. Now we call them 16 by 9. The reporters in my newsroom, I remember, actually had giant bulging pockets full of quarters because they had to call from payphones to set up interviews while we were out on the road. So I had a front row seat as technology changed the way that we created and crafted local news. I saw a lot of things happen over that 25-year period. We went through some dramatic changes, and I'll include a few of them now. Not just the massiveness of the internet, then the cell phone, which then became the smartphone, and then high-def TV, and cameras became smaller. I mean, it was a lot of things happening to get to where we are now. The news product of today is, of course, completely different. Daily TV used to be appointment viewing, where you planned each day to sit down and watch the news at a specific time. In fact, back then, with newspapers coming out in the morning, if you wanted an update on anything happening across the planet, you gathered for national news usually around 6 o'clock. But that's no longer the case. Today, it's on-demand viewing. And in most cases, your phone is your TV set. And it's especially true for our younger generations. And you can read or watch whatever you like, whenever you like. And that's a massive change in how we get our information and inform ourselves. The ripple effect from this transition is enormous. I would argue that one of the most staggering changes is how we consume news and how we educate ourselves. Research and revenue show that more and more of us are reading and streaming our information from a multitude of sources and formats, not just one place. But this explosion of ways to get information has come at a cost, because when the playing field is so cluttered, people have to find a way to stand out, to get noticed, to get you to listen or read, right? That's just how common sense dictates it. Being fair and balanced and neutral no longer cuts it. That's not shiny enough to grab your attention. And so truth is no longer the norm. Truth isn't the bedrock. Truth doesn't grab eyeballs or generate clicks or sell tickets. It's a lot of work to seek out truth. And of course, it does have to be searched for. It's not going to present itself. It's usually hiding itself. And if you don't have a compass, some sort of foundation, you'll follow whichever version of truth is the loudest or the flashiest or has the most bells and whistles. That's what we've learned about ourselves. So today we're going to talk about how you can search for the real thing, the truth that holds up under pressure, that doesn't bend with public opinion, and that still answers to a higher authority. So I'll begin with a question. Do you consider yourself a rational thinker? I think most of us would answer yes. However, recent data shows that we may be fooling ourselves. There's a growing change, as I just said, not only in how we consume news, but then how we also react to it. That's a big part of this. The family doesn't gather anymore around that set that I mentioned to find out the latest on the world. We don't get newspapers anymore. Those are almost extinct. And when you got a newspaper, you had to hope that what you were interested in was written about hours ago. Of course, now it's all instantaneous, but that comes at a price. We consume our news all day and all night. In fact, we get that from hundreds of different outlets, many of which aren't legitimate at all, and have a revolving door of reporters who are putting out the news that we read and think is true. In fact, some of it's done automated, and that's only going to become more true as AI gains more of a foothold. And these things have very little journalistic integrity. I went to journalism school. I'm proud of that. I love that. I think that's critical, that we have a free press, and that's how we get information. But think about it. How we get information now is that we scroll through our news feed at a breakneck pace. Everything has changed. So let's begin with what we now call news. You know, my news feed, and yours as well, is a curated stream of articles that updates every time you open that app. In fact, you may have noticed, especially let's say with like Apple News, which is an aggregate. It gets sources from all over. If I open it and close it and open it 30 seconds, 45 seconds later, I've got new articles because that's what people want. We want fresh. Think about that in relation to a newspaper that you got once in the morning. That was it until the following morning. Now, every time we open the app, it could be 5 minutes apart. We expect to see fresh and updated news. And as I scroll down that curated list, all those articles, they're all battling for my attention. Which one will I click on? How do they get my attention to click on it? Because if I click on it, then they get paid by the advertisers. So your eyeballs, the click, is money. And since we demand this instant and constantly updated news, it has to be updated and written very quickly or copied and pasted from somewhere else. You can sort of now start to get a sense of where we're seeing this decline and this deterioration. It happens so fast, in fact, that in the effort to be first, all right, and that's the big deal, we got to be first, things get compromised like research, facts, and even basic grammar. You've seen that. It goes right out the window. So we've changed the way that we demand to get our news, how we consume it, but we still seem to believe everything that we read in a headline with very little to back it up. And quite often, because this can be tracked, how long you look at something, we don't even read the article itself. In fact, research shows that we usually get about 3 seconds into an article and we move on to the next thing. We've scanned the headline, which we know now is misleading, just to get your attention. We barely read the article, if at all, and we leave it feeling like we're informed and basing our opinions on that. And then when we have a question about anything in the world, what do? We go to a search engine. That's what we do. When I was a kid, it was the Encyclopedia Britannica. Most of you have probably never even heard of that. It was a book that we were lucky enough to have a copy of or go to the library to do research for a project. Now we Google it, but we never doubt the answer, do we? Have you ever questioned who's writing the software? The thing that we see as our top search result, where did it come from? Somebody wrote the software or designed the algorithm. Who? And what's their angle? We now know, research has shown, there's a lot of thought that goes into that, and it can be misleading. That's very, very true. In fact, we're living the equivalent of walking into a bookstore to often answer questions like, how should I live my life? The things that inform me. Where am I looking for information so I can make my life decisions? But every single book has a blank white cover. And we just grab one off the shelf at random, we start reading it, and we implicitly believe and act out whatever's on the pages without doing the research. That's called vetting. We don't vet our research. And because of this new way that we get our information daily, we live in a time where outrage is currency and the click is king. But truth, what about truth? That's become an optional nuisance, a road hazard. In fact, the emphasis and objective of news has shifted. News used to be based on trust and accuracy. That's no longer the case because if you follow the dollar, it's about speed and getting you to click on it. So instead of all of our eyes turning to quality reporting or objective reporting or neutral reporting, We read and consume and are drawn to the extreme. And then that's what we forward and want to talk about, these bombastic headlines. And of course, now just as important, being able to chime in and make comments, right? That's a huge part of it now for every news organization, making sure you can post your incendiary, passionate comments that very often have very little thought put into it, which leads me to my next comment. This next thing I'm going to talk about alarms me on a molecular level. What we've come to because of comments and news, all right? Research on important topics for a reporter or a journalist to go out and spend time and ask questions and dig around has been replaced because of speed and the need to get things out quickly. We no longer do research. We simply scan the social media comments for whatever fits our narrative, and that is now the source. We see that all the time. Let that sink in for just a moment. You can scan through a news feed right now and find it. We've completely elevated the posts and opinions of normally faceless and nameless people, even if they have an avatar, who they lead the comments. And now entire news articles are written around those comments, and they're used as sources. So in other words, a reporter might say, the world explodes in outrage over this. Well, that reporter may have chosen 2 comments or 4 or 3 from a very select group of very activist-driven individuals, but now the whole article is built around them and their online comments, and they're the source. We don't know if they're credible. We don't know if they're valid. We don't know if they're sane. We don't know if they did any research. We just know they got angry enough to type out a response, and entire articles are based and written on that now, and so are the headlines. You need to think about that every time you're looking at news. You know, and think this as well. People who represent themselves with fake images and fake names, and sometimes even nonsensical names, they are those qualified sources for these stories that are driving the vehicle into your brain. And the gasoline in their engine is outrage. Okay, I want you to think about that. Every single article is about somebody who's outraged, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. And the reason behind all that, why are we at this point? Because the modern media economy rewards engagement, not accuracy. It's engagement. The entire algorithm is built on interaction, right? That promotes everything. That expands your influence, interaction. And you remember that word. We learned this from consultants being taught this by people that dealt with Facebook and everything else. Interaction. Well, how do you get people to interact? You make them mad. Or you deal with the ones that are on the far, far ends of the spectrum, right or left, and really want to get incendiary. So think about it. Reporters used to really work on a story before writing it or airing it. They'd seek a broad and very realistic representation of the public to gauge opinion. We've lost that completely. In today's newsroom or print room or journalism room or online source, they're demanded to do more with less experience, less capital, less money. Cut and paste happens all the time. And increase story count because you don't have as much bodies to do the research. So what's going to happen? It's, of course, impossible to accurately, responsibly research and develop a thoroughly a story. In fact, when I was on TV news, after someone had gone out and shot a story, or they call that a package, you shot your package, your story, you're supposed to type up a synopsis so that they could post the article online while it was on air. So you could watch it on air, which we know is a very shrinking bubble, or you could read it online. Click on any news story with any TV outlet in the world. It is the shortest, most bare bones thing you'll ever read, because reporters that are under stress and duress and have no time take out a few of the basic facts, slap it in a thing, post it so they can go on to the next thing because they got to turn another story. We're not getting the data that we need. The emphasis, of course, becomes on speed, not quality. And that type of reporting and information is not accurate. Rather, it's manipulative. Many reporters today don't have a neutral stance. They have a bias of one sort or another, and that very often comes through in their reporting. And in fact, it helps grow the problem. I used to tell all of our new reporters, that a man that I admired who sadly just passed, he was a reporter for many years here in town named Les Smith. I always enjoyed seeing Les's reporting, and he did it for many, many years, because when Les did a story, you never knew his personal opinion. It did not bleed through. He just reported it. He told you the story. He sought out the facts, and he was just passing that information along. That's gone out the window. I would tell new reporters, be like Les. When you do a story, I should have no idea what your personal opinion is. Just report it. That's flown out the window because it's easier to manipulate us when we're impassioned. So we've shifted from verify first, publish later, to publish first. Mistakes don't matter. You've seen that. And if a retraction is made, nobody ever sees that. So let's see where this very slippery glass slope takes us. I call this the psychology of belief. We just discussed how the people behind the stories, the ones that we're paying attention to, aren't normally doing deep research and being objective. I mean, that's the norm. Now, there are some good reporters out there. Of course there are. But just by the nature of this beast and what the money demands, it's getting harder and harder to deal with. Now, add to that mix this. This is a true social phenomenon. People like to be around other people who think and talk like they do. So let's think now more about your online data that you get, where you go to get your information online, which is what most of us are doing. We naturally avoid interacting with people who think differently from us, especially if they're rude or obnoxious, which seems to be the trend on social media because we're not doing anything in person anymore. There's no face-to-face reality. And that leads to something that we really need to be aware of called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is information that confirms what we already believe, and that's what we seek out. So if I believe something, I'm going to go find and I'm going to push away information that could challenge me. I'm only going to read information that believes what I already think. By the way, research shows that we really like to believe the worst. In fact, we're drawn to it. So you can see how all these things are starting to come together as our society kind of slides down this slope. We like to believe the worst. We seek out information that confirms what we already believe, and it only makes things more stressful. And so let's talk about stress. It is another proven fact that emotional language, emotional imagery, and high-stress topics often hijack rational thought. So you remember how I started this. I said, are you a rational thinker? Well, some studies link fast or reactive thinking styles when we see or read something, and right away we've got to respond and bang out a comment or shoot out an angry phrasing. We don't take time to think about it. That's called reactive thinking. Studies link that kind of fast thinking style versus a slow reflective style with greater susceptibility to conspiracy beliefs, misinformation, or evidence. So let that sink in. Studies show that if you read something and react immediately instead of thinking about it, you are more prevalent to conspiracy theories, misinformation, or real evidence. You don't want to be bothered with the truth or the evidence. You want to believe what you want to believe. So let me say this another way. When you read and instantly react, you don't give yourself time to process and think rationally. So I want you just to let this absorb this hamster wheel we're on. The old way, newspapers took time to get it. You could take time to read it throughout the day. TV news, which was, we had 3 or 4 channels back in the day. That's all there was. Listen to it, interact. You might get really mad, but it took a while to get to the water cooler the next morning. Today, all the money is driven by, can I get you to click on this article? It doesn't even matter if you read the whole thing. So how do I get you to read it? I give you a bombastic headline. I've had to deal with that in my past. It's something you don't want to deal with, where truth doesn't matter. By the way, I'll get to that in a minute. It doesn't give us time to process, and people don't think rationally. So now we're incensed, and we want more information on this topic that's got my blood boiling. So where do we go? The next problem, we go to echo chambers. And it's just what you think it is. An echo chamber is a site or a place where you get information and people are primarily exposed to information and talking heads that align with what they already believe, kind of like confirmation bias. You're going to go into that echo chamber so you can hear other people tell you what you want to believe. That's a dangerous thing. Research shows that when people are exposed to highly biased information, so this could be on either end of the spectrum, whether you're left or right, they develop what's called a false consensus. In other words, they believe more people share their views than actually do. All right? I'm going to say that again. When you live in an echo chamber, if you're only on one news channel or another, if you only go to one website or another, or you only go to the ones you like, you get what's called a false consensus. You think everybody thinks the way you do. And that can lead you to making some bad decisions, especially if your personality is not grounded in, let's say, the calm world, okay? People then begin to talk and act as if everyone thinks the same way they do, except for the crazy people, okay? I'm going to say that in fairness, just the people who are, you know what I'm saying. Now let's make it even more convoluted. Digital media algorithms. Your algorithm in your digital media follows what you read, tracks what you go to, and it can reduce viewpoint diversity. And that increases what they call homogenized data, which everything looks the same. So you start going into this wormhole where you're already incensed. You're hearing affirmations because everything's bombastic, and you don't really want to go hear bombastic on this side if you believe over here. So you're getting fed the same thing because we don't have any calm, neutral place to have a discussion. And we are reinforcing our biases and reducing critical reflection. All right. So where do we find truth? It's my belief, and it's a widely held belief, that this erosion of valid news and the erosion of a moral foundation has led to widely accepted relativism. All right, so what is relativism? Relativism is when truth depends on culture, context, or your individual belief rather than a universal standard. So in other words, right and wrong are not fixed, but they vary by society or person. And I would argue that that is extremely dangerous. And I'm going to say it another way. Relativism is, it's right because my culture or feelings say so. Now, moral objectivism, I would say that I'm a moral objectivist. Moral objectivism means some things are right or wrong regardless of opinion. And I believe that because I believe in moral absolutes. I'm a believer in the gospel. So we're almost done. What are you feeding your brain? I asked you earlier if you were a rational thinker. What do you feed your brain? Do you research what you're reading or watching? Are you asking who wrote it? Or did they do their research? Do you verify with several different sources? Let me ask you this. Does the article include inflammatory words? Now, these words are designed to manipulate you. And I see this in headlines all the time. Let me give you a couple of examples. Outraged. These are the words that you will see read. That you will read. And I just saw one today. Internet outraged over NFL comment. Well, you read the article. The reporter cherry-picked one or two people who you don't know who said some awful things online, but that was their source, that everybody's outraged. So look for keywords like outraged, slammed, explodes, these huge, active, volatile words that are designed to get you worked up. And maybe more importantly, can you wait before you react? That's a good one, isn't it? Maybe you grew up with the old adage, count to 10 before you respond. And the idea being give yourself time to calm down, let your blood pressure come down, think about it, get a little more rational. Because truth can withstand time, but lies need urgency. You know, that's a big problem now with scams and fraudsters. They need you to act quickly. That's another red flag, by the way. If somebody calls you and needs your data, your information, Social Security, if they need it quick, fast, they can't wait, that should tell you something's wrong here. Lies need urgency. So here's my closing challenge. And I appreciate you guys listening and kind of spending time with this very important sort of discussion today. Pursue truth like a discipline. Pursue truth daily and do it humbly and do it prayerfully. Seek truth out. Remember my phrase, a lie will travel around the world before the truth puts its shoes on. I mean, that's something we've all dealt with. You know, remember Philippians 4:8, which says, focus on whatever is true, noble, right, and pure. Now just remember, friends, my closing words. The world will always chase clicks, outrage, and noise. It's always going to be that way. But truth, it sits quietly waiting to be found. It's there. It's in Scripture. It's in that quiet voice in your head quite often. And sometimes it's in the painful lessons that we're forced to learn and live. It comes alongside that. You know, the Bible says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I think that's true as well. I think that gives everything perspective. So the next time a headline grabs you, pause, ask some questions, dig deeper, meditate on it, give it time. Don't react immediately, because quite often the first thing we say is not the best thing we can say. It's after we've considered it and thought about it. Remember that truth deserves your attention and diligence, 100%. And if you ever wonder where truth lives, open the Word. It's timeless. It's still there and as steady as it's always been. All right, friends. I want to thank again Lexus of Memphis for being our sponsor. I'm so proud to be partnered with them. They're a great group, phenomenal product. And if you've got anything you'd like to add, a comment or a question or an idea for a future show, email us. We'd love to hear from you, and we appreciate the ones who have written in. You can email us at thecurrenttemp@gmail.com. Pretty easy to remember. Please subscribe on YouTube to The Current Temp. And you can watch on my Facebook page if you follow me there. I post once a week, usually on Thursdays. And you can also listen on Spotify. All right, friends, be diligent in your search for truth, and have a great week.